sir.
Welcome, Jamie.
Hello.
We met actually at a London Drupal meetup, right?
Yeah.
Where you were talking about all things Drupal, but with the angle of using ChatGPT to kind of do prompt engineering, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that today.
Yes.
Before we jump into your talk, you are a director of a company called FreelyGive, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, so we've been working with Drupal for a while. Our focus was native Drupal CRM.
Mm-hmm.
So what we found was, like if you have a Salesforce CRM, you've got loads of data in it, and you need to integrate it with the front-end website. It's quite a lot of work to do a bridge between these two things.
Yeah.
And for CRMs where your end users are actually managing the data themselves a lot, let's say you're a charity, it's quite nice to actually build it in the front-end software because they can just get to it.
Yeah.
And we built quite a few. What I always say is that most Drupal websites, you're aiming for millions of users to use it for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And we tend to build software where we're aiming at 50 users, but they're using 8 hours a day because it powers what they do as a business.
Awesome.
So that's been our thing. But yeah, then I got into AI, and that's just become my new obsession. I just sort of.
Any of your clients that you would like to give a shout out to who are publicly known, like any sort of FreelyGive clients that you guys?
Yeah, so for a while we worked a lot in the rail industry.
Uh-huh.
So we had people like Northern and Southwestern Rails as our clients.
Yeah.
And then right now we've got a number of like smaller charities that we have as our clients.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very, very good. So you're here today to kind of help us understand how to use prompt engineering and do it better. You've been looking at this subject for months and months and months.
Yeah.
It's actually, I was saying this to Noah, this is insane how ChatGPT itself has really only been popularized for just over a year, right? I think it was December pretty much 2022 that it was kind of released to the wild. I mean, I know it existed, but 3.5 basically was released on December 1st or so like that. And then, wow, here we are 13 months later, and this is where we're at. I mean, insane. So you've been looking at this for months.
Yeah, it's been crazy, especially because 6 months ago, if I spoke to people about AI, they barely knew about it. They'd assume it's machine learning, or it was like an interesting thing you heard about in the news.
Yeah.
So trying to chat to people, it was cool. There were fun conversations, but it was even amongst developers, most people had a busy job, so they didn't have time to research it. And in the last couple of months even, it's changed. I'm now meeting people who actually have a good understanding of AI stuff, who are building things that actually work for clients.
Yeah.
So the change has been quite a big deal. I feel like we're in a place now where ChatGPT is empowering real value to people rather than being this cool idea and cool demos.
Absolutely. Amazing.
We're going to do a talk about prompt engineering. I'm calling it advanced techniques. I think some of you who have done this a lot might find this not that advanced. If you've been really building a lot of AI applications yourself, this is sort of like the basics. But if you're someone who's been using the website, these techniques are the kind of things that will empower it to the next level, will help you with developing with AI. So I'm talking about prompt engineering advanced techniques, whereas the last talk was aimed at a non-developer. Non-developers will still benefit with this, but this is more aimed at the developer-y thing, with slightly more complex prompts that you need to deal with. What I'm going to do is give you a basic introduction and understanding of prompt engineering. We'll move into the standard helpful things for everyone, and then tackle some of the more advanced techniques and things that you're going to really want to dive into some code for when you're trying to solve complex problems. Yes, I'm the co-founder of a tech agency focusing on native Drupal CRM. Yeah, I've been obsessed with AI recently. It's FreelyGive.io. So my obsession with AI happened, I don't know how many months ago, 6-7 months ago, around about ChatGPT 3.5 came out. A friend of mine who was on, he works sort of in tech, but he was on paternity leave and he just phoned me up and was like, Jamie, I can make an app. Never made an app before, I can now do this. This is a skill I have. And it took him an hour. So then I thought, oh, well, why don't we try this out with my wife? She knows no programming, is not really a techie. Let's see if she could just build an app. So we did this experiment where I sat next to her just to provide her moral support, really, not to actually help her do anything, and say, could you just go to ChatGPT and build an app? And she's like, well, where do I get started? And I was like, well, ask it. And every single step of the way, what to download, what code to write, etc. And it was a fun little app. It was just a little app that I've got on my phone, and you have a button when you press it, a hyena laughs. It's not groundbreaking, but she's gone from I can't program at all to I can make a thing. And actually, she then had a complicated data transform. She's in HR, and this software spat out really terribly organized CSV file. It was good to look at, but not good to do any analysis with. And she wanted to do some relatively complex averages. And it took a couple of days this time, but we got ChatGPT to look at this, help her write a VBA macro, and she managed to win Employee of the Month, and we got I think £150 for it. So that was our first sale in HR, in AI back in the day. Oh yeah, and the other thing is her dad's a doctor, and he is not into tech, not very good with these things. And I am very geeky and into all the new things like VR and all that kind of stuff, and I keep trying to show it to all of my friends and everyone I know. I wasn't interested in it, but this AI stuff, I showed it to him. And I'm a recent father, I'd leave the room, and he'll just come back and he's sitting there playing with this ChatGPT thing. I've never seen him like that, with all these little ideas. And what I did notice was, although it was great that my wife could build an app, there was something about my training and my background that meant that I could get ChatGPT to do what I wanted slightly better than her. In fact, even my father-in-law was pretty good at it, even though he was terrible at tech. There's something about my background, and I studied physics with philosophy, and I can't program myself, but I've done a lot of the systems architecture, so I've got a little bit of an engineering mindset, and as a doctor, he had a more scientific mindset. There was something that we could do that my wife could do, but not quite as well. And that was exciting because, the first time I looked at ChatGPT, there was this fear: is this going to destroy all jobs? Am I gone? Have I been building this company and it's just going to come crashing down because in a year's time, all developer jobs will be gone? And it was quite encouraging that there is something I can do still. And what is this thing? And maybe this thing is called prompt engineering. So prepared for this talk, when I first started off, I was against any prompt engineering. I wanted to just see what it was like using ChatGPT as an assistant that was a human I could do whatever I want with. So I would say please and thank yous. I was nice. I'm hoping that when the AI comes along and kills us all, it's going to remember how polite I was to it. I would do things like deliberately leave in spelling mistakes. I'm terrible with spelling. I hate having to check it all the time. I find that little line is like a personal offence at me every single time Word tries to correct me. So I just leave it all in and see what happens. And it was really cool to be able to just play around with it and do prompt engineering, but in this very natural, scientific way. But to prepare for this talk, I thought, let's go and take a look at the academic literature on this. And let's go and what I was hoping for is that I'd go along and read some really complicated paper that has been studied extensively, and they'd tell me these techniques, and suddenly, magically, these things would, all my prompts would magically get better. And I didn't get there, unfortunately. But what I found is, so these are my sources. This first one here, promptengineeringguide.ai. This is the most academic. It's quite interesting. A lot of papers are new. They're like 2022, 2023. And this looks at the prompt engineering from a very scientific point of view. And all these papers are published, and it will summarize these papers. Then there was this learn prompting site that I went through. And this is really cool because it gives you examples that you can work with. It's sort of got an integration with ChatGPT itself. So as you're learning, you can start typing the prompts, trying to refine them yourself, and it'll give you the answers right away. OpenAI themselves have a prompt engineering guide. Fantastic. I would actually now say this is the best place to start. It's quite short, much more to the point, and everything in that is useful. And then what I haven't quite got into as much, but everyone tells me it's amazing, and it was at the beginning, was this one, deeplearning.ai, which was created by someone called Andrew in collaboration with OpenAI. It really takes you through prompt engineering. But yeah, what I was hoping for was I would go in, read these academic documents, I would have a cool list of prompt engineering techniques, I'd be able to tell you all about it, and suddenly everything magically would get better. But if we move on to the next slide, that is not what I found, unfortunately. Firstly, one of the reasons why I thought this would be really cool was there's a Business Insider thing here where an AI prompt engineering job can pay $375k a year and don't require any background in tech. It really did feel like there was this period of time where if I just learn prompt engineering, maybe that will be my job for the next 20 years and I'll earn loads from it. But there's this fantastic tweet here, which I now fully believe, which is many believe prompt engineering is a skill one must learn to be competitive in the future. The reality is, prompting AI systems is no different than being an effective communicator with other humans. The same principles apply in both cases. This makes me bullish on reading, writing, and speaking as the three underlying skills that really matter in 2024. I heard this expression from someone the other day, that actually we all have instances. Everyone's talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, but actually all of us are very adept at working with something even more special called HGI, human general intelligence. All the time we're dealing with that, we're interacting with it. And you likely work with and have deep relationships with HGI, focusing on the skills necessary to effectively communicate with humans, will future-proof you for a world with AGI. And I'm finding that. I find the physics side of my background is cool for helping me, for the engineering bit, solving problems, the complicated maths. But actually it's the philosophy side. It's, my wife did psychology. It's those kind of things. It's learning the English language. It's learning how to communicate that I think is more powerful. So before we go into prompt engineering, I thought a little exercise. Okay, so imagine you are a master salesperson. So we've got Paul here, you're him, right? You're the absolute genius, and you have the job of selling your software to the ruler of Atlantis. This is the best opportunity, but unfortunately, Paul can't make it. And he's sitting there, you're him, you have got this intern with you, and the intern can go along to this meeting. You can't do it. This intern is a genius. They have a crazy high IQ. They are charismatic and sociable. They have an Oxbridge degree. They have a general knowledge, which means they win every single pub quiz. But they're only 20. They joined you yesterday. They've never worked a day in their life. They just come straight out of university. And you have a month to get them ready to sell your software to the ruler of Atlantis. So what would you do in that 1 month to prepare them? Can only have people throwing out ideas.
One, understand what the problems of the ruler of Atlantis are.
Right?
Yeah. So understand those. If you don't understand the problems, you're horrible.
Cool. Understand the problems, and then I'm guessing get the intern to know what those are.
Oh yeah.
Right? Any ideas? What else would you do with this intern?
Do some dummy runs.
Dummy runs.
Get them to do some pitches to, not quite Atlantis, but
right.
Maybe to Paul.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. So you can get them to do dummy runs to you, to people you know, but also maybe not the rule of Atlantis, a couple of smaller companies, a couple of smaller things.
Exactly.
Fantastic. What other things would you do?
Give them some of the previous pitches that person has done,
yeah.
So they can learn from.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, give them, so you've trained them with actual real life experience, but also just looking at how previous things have been done where you did it.
Look at the competitors that might also be selling to the rulers of Atlantis. Right? Yeah. So who else is pitching to them?
Who else is pitching, and then take a look at those pitches.
I hope they actually understood the product too, what you were selling.
Yeah, you're going to have to teach them. So how would you even tell them about the product? What would you do so that they know this product? Because this intern's just appeared, and they've got a whole month to prepare. So what would you get them doing in the first week to understand that product?
Use it.
Use it, yeah. Probably read documentation.
Yeah.
Make sure they go to the next SurreyDevs and listen to you.
He's had something there?
Give them a guide on the kind of language that suits the leader of Atlantis.
Yeah, and so what I would say is a lot of the things here are going to map on to the techniques I'm going to talk about before. So if you think about the guide, that's called, you could call it giving it context. You could call it training. You could call it giving it some data. A lot of this stuff to do with showing previous examples is really important. I think one thing you'll do is you'll try, if you've got someone who's new and they're having to sell to the ruler of Atlantis, one thing you mentioned was, okay, we're going to look at their competitors, we're going to understand the software. So one thing you've done is you've taken this complex task and you've broken it into chunks, and you've started getting this intern to understand those chunks. And we're going to find that it links to what we're going to move on to now. So the first thing we keep hearing is be clear and concise. It's actually very difficult to communicate. In fact, the question, particularly in your 20s, if you go up to someone and say, what do you want in life? If they're going to go for a job and say, what do you want? It's very hard to answer that question clearly and concisely. You kind of know what it is when you get there, but being able to communicate to someone what you want is a very difficult thing. If you're in a relationship, one of the reasons why therapy is so important right now is a lot of it is about being able to communicate to another human being who you know really well and who's been with you for a long time what you want. But we struggle with that. Being clear and concise it's easy to take that for granted as simpler than it is. But actually figuring out how to tell the person or the thing what you want in a clear and concise way is complicated. We've talked about giving it examples. So in the prompt you can say previous examples of if you ask it to do something, you give examples of that thing being done well in the past. Specify the format is now more techy, but there's a lot of time, particularly as devs, that we're going to want the prompt to give an answer in JSON formats, as maybe HTML, maybe you wanted to write some Python. But then part of giving specify the format is the style that you want it to write. You might give it examples of how you do that style. One of the things that I've always thought about is if you're training someone with, let's say, music or to drive a car, there's going to be some theory where you tell them what to do. But imagine if you were a driving instructor and you decided to teach someone entirely through telling them what to do all the time. Probably not going to work. You're going to need to have some real life experience. And so one of the tricks of good prompt engineering is to know when to tell it and when to give examples. And sometimes simply giving an example of what you want it to look like actually encapsulates a lot of what you want that would be hard to say explicitly. Set roles, so we heard about personas. It's a clear thing. Tell it what kind of person to be. So you could do something like, as a sales executive, I want you to help me write something. But you could go further. What kind of sales executive do you want to be? Is this the kind of sales executive that is just bullish, that will just go after a person, that it will just aggressively sell, and try and get something as quick as possible? How much is this salesperson allowed to lie? How much allowed to massage the truth? Are they into building a nice long-term relationship with a client? Set the scene of this sales assistant more than just the title. Give them examples of a sale done well or not to help build that persona with that person. I think delimiters are really important, and so having clear places that you say, you might go hash, 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 here's an example, hash, 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 here's the instruction. Clear places where you're telling it what is an instruction, what is an example. Now, one of the things I do feel is, as I said before, prompt engineering I do think is becoming less important as a scientific thing and more as just communicating clearly. But what and one of the things I really struggled with, I wanted to give you loads of cool examples of something gone wrong, I then do some prompt engineering and suddenly it magically goes right. What I've found is that the models are improving so much that the need for prompt engineering for simple tasks is getting less and less and less. Simple maths it would struggle with a lot, but now it's getting a lot better. But what you find is that the more complex a task is, the more this stuff matters. So a lot of the time I didn't bother with delimiters, I just said, here's some text from a book, answer this question, and it would get it right. But the more complex your task is, and the same thing when you're dealing with that intern, the more complex a task is, the less you want to make it think. The less you want to make it have to struggle with understanding where one thing is or not, where this is a style guide and this is the content. So delimiters, I think, actually become much, much more important the more complex your prompt is. Giving it data, I mean, we talked about RAG, I'm going to go into detail about RAG as well, but consistency is a cool thing that you can do, which is, as we've heard before, ChatGPT will give you, or all LLMs will give you different answers when you ask the same question a bunch of times. So one thing you can do is ask it the same question maybe 3 times and take the best of 3 as your answer. Just before I move on to advanced techniques, can I get a show of hands? I probably should have started with this. How many people here have used ChatGPT before? I'm guessing like everyone, right? Okay. How many people have worked with the API? They've written code that worked with the API in some way. Cool, okay. How many people have used LangChain or at least know about LangChain? Right. Cool. And finally, like, is terms like chain of thought, does that mean anything to anyone? Yeah, trees of thought, does that mean anything to anyone? Okay. So some advanced techniques. The term that a lot of people like to use for the simple prompt is zero shot, which you just ask it a question and you get an answer. And that's the very basic of a prompt. A slightly more advanced technique would be few shot. So it's very similar to like giving examples, but what you do is you ask it a question and then you give an answer. You ask it another question and then you give an answer. You ask it another question and then you ask it for an answer. And that helps guide the LLM in the direction. It sort of engages its brain. There's all these complicated metaphors of how the thing works that are probably not technically accurate, but are quite helpful sometimes when you're planning your prompts. That you want to get someone thinking about it. Let's say you're again that example of selling to Atlantis, the example of like the competitors that you brought up. You might just want to get the guy to like read some, or the person to like read some novels about living under the water. Get them like in the mood where they're thinking about the area that you're looking at. And few shot sort of does that. One of the most powerful, and I still think useful techniques is chain of thought. So some of you have heard about it before. For those that you don't know, there was this magical thing you found. In the early days, I tried to get it to write code, like I said, write an app. And you'd ask it to write code, and it'd be really buggy. One weird thing is that if you said a whole prompt, do all this stuff, write me some code, and at the end said, and check your work for bugs, it just produced less bugs. It was like magic. It didn't really make any sense. And in the early days, so you can see the source here, this more from the academic literature, of we found, like I said, that was very bad at maths. So you'd ask it a maths question, and it would just get the answer wrong. But if you just said, show me your working, magically you'll get the answer right. And this is sort of what chain of thought is. It can get much more complicated. You could say, write me a pitch for this chain of, write me a pitch you're going to give to the rule of Atlantis, to your bot. But one thing you could do is say, first, write down the steps of what you'll need to do to prepare for a really good pitch. And then it goes through that. And then ask it to actually go through those steps. And the more you allow it to, some people use the phrase, give it time. The more you give it time to think, the more likely it is to get a good answer. And this is in chain of thought. And this is one thing where actually recently we had a thing where one of my friends wanted to get ChatGPT to give it an itinerary for a 3-week trip to New Zealand. And it gave you this itinerary, but it would have different sections. It would be like this area of New Zealand, then this area. And it would count the days twice. So it would go days 1 to 5, then the next one, days 5 to 7, then the next one, days 7 to 8. And it ended up, that day 5, it double counted each time, so we ended up with way too much stuff in. So instead what we did, we asked it to write down, just go through the itinerary, but write down the day, and then it got it right. So there's some kind of magic to it, where if it can go through that working, it's more likely to get the right answer. Before I move on to these techniques here, is there any questions about what I've talked about? Yeah.
So are you talking about just cheat sheet, or because when you say chain of thought, we can't train someone who have like kind of 15 questions down the line. You know, like if I ask questions and I talk with ChatGPT for let's say 30 questions down the line, answers to me is totally different than what maybe 5 years experienced developer asked. So that input, how can we train someone to do that prompt to the ChatGPT?
Okay, so we're going to talk about chaining prompts.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's quite fun is when you're a developer and you're working with the APIs, there will be 3 types of prompts, I think, messages, and they are like system, assistant, and user.
Yeah.
So the user is the prompt that the user's written, the assistant is what ChatGPT said back to you, and then the system one is usually the overarching one of setting the scene of what it is like. And if you're on chat.openai.com, you're having this conversation back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
But actually with the API, the model doesn't really have a memory. It doesn't really do conversation. You're faking that in your app. So in your app, you have to store that history. Mm-hmm. And one thing that you can do sometimes is trick ChatGPT into thinking it's giving you an answer that you wanted. So what you would do is you ask a question and say, plan a fantastic pitch for Atlantis. And you can get ChatGPT to give you the answer. And if you're trying to do everything automated, I think that will make your prompt a lot better. But if you want to push it in a direction, you could actually submit as an assistant message the answer you've written. A lot of the time what's best is to get ChatGPT to give you the answer first, modify it yourself. Rather than just write the assistant message, modify what ChatGPT gave you, and then stick that into your next prompt. And this is one way in which you can chain things, chain these prompts together, and do sort of like a slightly augmented chain of thought.
So does it like kind of same ChatGPT can teach me that prompts as well?
Mm. Yeah, so also something you can do a lot of the time is just ask it, here's my question, rewrite this as a better prompt for me, and then execute it. And then that would also be another way in which you can do a chain of thought thing that will improve your prompts.
I haven't tried it in programming, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and this is one of the things that particularly I've been saying, and that was part of the guy who I put on Twitter, is that ChatGPT is getting much better at prompting. So this chain of thought one, that was magical. Like you would just write a question, and if you just added the line, take this step by step, you would just get the right answer. If you didn't add that right line, it would get the wrong answer. And so in the early days, knowing this magic words, let's think this through step by step, would make your prompts better. But now they've baked it into the prompt itself. So you'll notice a lot of the time if you ask it some maths questions, well, ChatGPT 3.5 at least, you ask it some questions, the first sentence will be like, oh yeah, I'm really happy to answer your question. Let's think about this step by step. And that magic phrase is not there by accident. It's because actually ChatGPT is trying to train or is trying to assume good prompt engineering and bake that into its answer. So it goes to itself. Let's take this step by step. It does it step by step. It gets the right answer. Which is why I found it so hard to give you examples of it doing it badly, because it would just do all this prompt engineering itself. Yeah.
Slightly off side topic, but with more people using agents, also very specialised things that look at maths and look at Wikipedia lookups and that, how is that affecting the way that prompts are relying on the trained content? And if you knew that you were using agents, and maybe that's not for now, but maybe for later, how would you customise your prompts?
Yeah, so I'll move on to that then. So for people who actually know, I'm overly simplifying it. So I'm putting number 4, 5, and 6 as RAG. I'm sort of talking about using something that's external, which is sort of back to what you're talking about. Chaining prompts together, which is the idea of you do a prompt, get an answer, and then do something with it. And then validation. And what I want to do is show you some real examples of these 5 things and go into a little bit more depth with it, and then I can address your question as we do that. So yeah, we've already talked about retrieval augmented generation, where you provide data from some external source. Chaining prompts, instead of one huge prompt, we have a series of prompts to get to a right answer, which might interact, again, using the first thing, might interact with a system, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then finally, validation. One powerful prompt engineering tool is to build tools to evaluate how good your prompt is according to some data set you have, and then you can start improving your prompt, but you have actual statistics to see how good it is. So I'm going to move into talking about that in detail. I'm lumping this all together, which is sort of what you're talking about. I'm lumping this all together. It's not really all RAG, but there's one way which you can augment and improve your prompts, which is you use some kind of external data source. So built into ChatGPT, they use Bing. So it's limited to knowledge up to about, at the moment, April 2023. But sometimes when you ask it a question, particularly ChatGPT 4, it will go off the internet and search for it. And so that's some way in which you can augment the knowledge that it has, because now it can crawl the internet. I'm not finding it's very good yet. But you could have an external software or database or graphs. They're not here today, but some people who come to SurreyDevs really into maybe graphs are going to be the future. And there's this Archivix scientific paper called Graph Prompt, exploring how graphs can be used more effectively with LLMs. But you might just have a data source, which is like your CRM system, and you could then give your prompt. In the prompt, you could give, this is how to interact with my software. If you need some information from this, use a REST API that looks like this. And ChatGPT will call it function calling. I mean, you can also just make it say those things. But what you can do is do something called function calling, where you ask it a question. It knows it can't get the answer itself, so call something else. Then there's this code interpreter, which is something, again, ChatGPT uses, where, because it was very bad at maths, instead of giving you the answer itself, it would write some Python code, run that Python code, and give you the answer based around that. And I think this is a really powerful tool that we're going to, especially as developers, want to use quite a lot. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So I do think what's going to happen, I think, and if I go into more detail about how I imagine the Drupal ecosystem will look like, I do think there is going to be a future where instead of one single LLM to rule them all, you're going to have something like with Hugging Face, where there's a whole bunch of these agents are really good at different things, and the single controller knows where to go when you ask a particular question. You can even have it so you're chaining these prompts. Here's a list of 100 tools you could use. Here is a prompt. Which of these tools should I use? You can start with that and then move into the next stage, and I'll talk about that a bit more. But let's move on to embedding and vector search. So this is this thing that everyone talks about called RAG, embeddings and vector search. About 6 months ago, this was a hot topic. Everyone was excited about it. I have since been told that what I'm about to tell you is the naive RAG, the stupid version of RAG. There's a cool, better version of RAG out there. And it is. It's a very simple way of a very brute force way of dealing with things. And there's this thing called an embedding. The academic literature calls embedding a way of representing data as points in n-dimensional space, so similar data points clustered together. That means nothing to me. I have no idea. To some of you, I'm sure that is completely sensible. What I like to think of, and it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, is a way of capturing and scoring what something means. And so we have this thing where what we do is we have an embedding model that takes a bunch of text and tries to put a whole bunch of numbers on what this thing might be about. So let's say we're talking about games, and we talk about a ball. How much is the word ball related to the concept of a game? You can imagine ranking it from a scale of 0 to 1. Grass. You could say, how much is the word grass related to a game? Well, a lot of sports use grass pitches, but also grass is a lawn, it's just a plant. So it might have a lower score with that. Embedding is sort of a way of looking at a whole bunch of text and then scoring those things. And so one powerful way to get ChatGPT or an LLM to understand some of your own text is by using this thing. It was, in the early days particularly, the amount of information you could provide it was very small. So giving a whole book, it wouldn't be able to know the book. Now things have changed, and this is somewhat less important because you can actually give these LLMs very large amounts of data now. But there might still be reasons for this. So what we do is step one is we take our data source. Let's say it's a textbook. I'm going to do what is Drupal. It's a textbook on the history of Drupal and what it is. It's not being trained on ChatGPT, and it's huge. Costs thousands of pages. And we're going to chunk it into little bits, maybe paragraphs, maybe 100 words, 500 words. Each of those bits we embed, step 3, which is rank its relevancy, and then we store it in a vector store. We used to use Pinecone. There's a lot of open source ones now. Somebody comes along and writes a prompt. What is Drupal? We go to embed that using the same model, and we get another scoring of what that thing is about. Then we use something called semantic vector search that does a comparison of everything that is in your vector database and finds things that are similar in meaning. So the academic thing is similar data points clustered together, but because this embedding is sort of to do with the meaning of words, it ends up with linking them based around the meaning. You then rank those results, you put the top 5 into your chat, and then you go, what is Drupal? Here's the context that you should use to answer this question. And that means instead of giving a just general answer, it will give you based around your source material. And it was very cool, and when it came out, everyone sold it as ChatGPT can use all of your data, all of your company files. In reality, that's not entirely true. So before I move into some problems, anyone got any questions about this? I know I've moved quite quickly.
Could you briefly explain the sort of more advanced, fancy version? Because at the beginning you said this is...
No.
You can if you want.
This guy can.
So the naive will just take a simple retrieval with those vectors, but that assumes just at the level of the chunk, 500 bytes or whatever, 500 tokens. What you can do is start playing with sentence scope. So you find something at the level of the sentence which makes sense, and you then assume that sentences, maybe 4 to 5 to 6 sentences before and after, are going to relate. And so that is one mechanism where you start doing a sentence bracketed type thing, and results are typically better than naive. What you can also do is start breaking it up into chunks, and you've got chunks within chunks, and that if you actually, so it's a hierarchical model, and if you find something which is relevant, then some of the chunks around that are likely to be relevant as well. So if you have enough hits, you can say, well, this was just a one-off hit, but if I see 2 or 3 hits that match semantically, then I'm going to bring that entire Uber chunk in, and I'll use that as part of my context.
Okay, yeah, so an example of something we encountered early on. So we built using Drupal. You had an e-commerce website, has a whole bunch of products in it. Or no, one of them was a resource library. Loads and loads of academic materials to do with prisons. It was a charity to do with prisons and researching that. And we wanted to use RAG to provide true semantic search. A search that could look at your question and really understand the content and give you something, not just word search. But one problem is if you had a text that was very relevant to what you were asking for, then when I did my ranked results, all 5 chunks were just from the same document. And it's just ignored everything else. So that's one way in which this naive thing kind of failed. One of the other things that I find was really complicated at the beginning was this stuff was really good at getting positive answers. So I want a paper. I've got some document and I want to predict which way the elections are going to go. Give me a document. Does this document tell me anything that will help me predict the elections? If the answer is yes, it will find something that's relevant and it will give you. If the answer is no, you don't really know that it doesn't help you. You just know that this search thing found no results. But the fact that it found no results doesn't mean that there might be some way it will help you. It's comparing the meaning of the words, but there might be some argument about housing prices and the direction housing prices will go depending on policies, and you know that this particular person has those policies, and you know that thing impacts it. But this embedding can't do any reasoning about it. It can just find relative meanings. So what I found is that, generally speaking, if you're asking a question where there's a negative answer, where you're interested in a lack of there being relevance, it's not so good. If you're looking for something positive, it was very good. So there's a lot of things that I've found that when we move away from RAG and into ginormous context windows, where the LLM just has the whole book in its memory, it gives much better answers. And there's a couple of cases I've had recently with policy documents, where the answers in the new assistance API stuff from OpenAI, in the new big models that Claude have and OpenAI have, that can just understand so much data, gives way better answers. It can tell you, oh, the thing you're asking for isn't in there. It can even do things like, it doesn't answer your question, but here's areas where it almost answers your question. It's much, much cleverer. Yeah, similarly, I wanted to do something like, I'm a lawyer, and I have a legal case that I'm working on right now, and I have a whole stack of 10,000 prior cases. Which ones are relevant? RAG might be able to help, but you're probably going to want to do something cleverer. You're probably going to want to do something where it actually, an LLM with reasoning looks at each piece of content and then ranks it itself by some kind of thought process, more than just, are these meanings clustered together? Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, just to add, I think what made me more interested about RAG was when I understood that you can start to add references. I think that was the game changer. I showed them the persona. When you start adding referencing, then you can actually immediately know if it's making something up or if it's actually correct. You can then refer to the documents. Okay, in page 26 of this document, this is why you said this. I think that's the key on this RAG.
Yeah, and I think that's good for that thing about positive stuff again. So when it's a positive thing, fantastic, it does referencing. But it doesn't give you a reference for, I couldn't find anything, or there is nothing there. I couldn't find anything, it can tell you, but there is nothing there. That requires quite a lot of thought. Okay, chaining prompts. So here's one little problem that we had. We're working with Drupal, and we want to, and some of the people who have seen my talk before will know about this case, we want to ask Drupal, we want to ask it to write a report for us. Wouldn't it be cool if, when I've got like a web shop, if I want some particular information about it, instead of having to like learn this reporting software where I drag and drop things and I do sums, I could just speak in natural language and it would generate a report for me. Now Drupal stores a lot of things in something called views, and views saves everything in something called YAML, which is like a word-based configuration thing, and YAML is text, and ChatGPT can write text. So I thought, it doesn't know how to use my software, but it can write this text. If I import it into Drupal, I'd get a cool report. At the time, the problem we had was ChatGPT was limited to about 8,000 tokens, and YAML is very verbose, it's really complicated. All of our field structure, there's loads of it, so I can't just give it to ChatGPT and get an answer. So we started chaining things. And what we'd do is we'd say, okay, a prompt is asking for a list of products sold in a certain country. And instead of giving me the answer, I'd say, here's a list of all of the, in Drupal we call them content types, but you can imagine tables, a list of all the tables in our database. Which of these tables are likely to be relevant to this question? It then gives an answer in JSON. So then I ask it another question. Here's a list of all of the fields in those tables. Which of these fields are going to be related to my question? And then I go to a final prompt. Here's all the fields. Now write me a report using all those fields. We found even better stuff where you ask it just to write SQL code with the same kind of thing. And now it can give you the answer. And if you combine this concept of chaining with a lot of the things I've talked about before, you could do really powerful things. Because then you can make this agent go through all your data and go, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a decision, I'll pass it to another agent, then I'll make a decision. In here, what we've got is a combination of ChatGPT and Drupal, because ChatGPT gave a list of content types. Drupal then receives that content types and gives you a list of fields. So in this situation, I'm building a little service in Drupal that can take information from ChatGPT and give it something back, which now means I can do these powerful chains of LLMs communicating with some software I can control, going back to an LLM, going back to software I control, and very advanced workflows can be built using this chaining prompts method. Validation. So here's something that we worked on recently. We've built a delay repay system. And this is for the train operating companies. And if your train's delayed, you'll go to the train company's website or app, you'll upload an example of your ticket that you used, put in your ticket information, and we built this complicated business application behind the scenes that calculates how delayed your train is, pays you your money back based around the band, sorts out potential for fraud, customer service stuff, auditing things. There's a whole bunch of things there. But one of the things we struggled with the most was step one. I've got an image of a ticket and I want to know, is it valid on this particular route? It's complicated because if you look at tickets, they'll have like the word National Rail over and over and over again. So the text on it is very split up. There's a lot of different ticket types. Very hard to know what is on those tickets. A lot of these tickets and the structure were made 50 years ago based around these really old machines. Some of them are e-tickets, but then the IDs, there's a lot of complicated stuff with that. So what we found was it was very hard to automate, but then with ChatGPT, we just OCR'd the stuff, passed it into a prompt that we'd written, and magically, every time we tried it, we got it right. And we didn't do very much work to achieve this, so we thought, well, how are we going to sell this to a train operating company? Because getting it right once or twice is not something it can trust. So we built this validation system. And so what we do here is we load in a whole bunch. Here's 200, we're about to get access to a good 10,000 or so. A whole bunch of previous submissions handled by humans and what a human decided on. But it's all stored in a way that is in this Drupal system that can export stuff in a format that ChatGPT can look at and compare to the OCR. And we've got loads and loads of tickets that have been into the system. And then what we can do is ask it to then just run through those historical things and give a percentage. How many did it decide to automate? How many did it decide, I don't want to automate this, it's too complicated for me, I want a human to look at it? How many did it get right when it did one of those two things? How many times did it do false positives, and how many times did it do false negatives? Then we built this system that allows you to click on a run and see all the different submissions and all the different ways in which the human and the ChatGPT didn't get things right. So what you're seeing here is some chain of thought. Instead of just asking it the question, is this valid for this ticket? We would go through the steps of what a human would need to do to evaluate that. Does the price match? Does the time match? Does the destination step match? Ask him those questions and get the bot to output it in JSON as yes or no, store it and compare it, and then store and compare the final answer. And it means that we can then see how good our prompt is, but also we can debug the prompt, because if it gets it wrong, I can go and find a place where it gets it wrong, where there's some red, click on the submission, look at it with my eyes, reason, okay, I can see why it was wrong. So maybe somebody put in more than one ticket, and 3 were invalid, but 1 was valid, and the bot decided therefore the whole thing's invalid. So now we can adjust our prompt to include that. We sort of also, a technical term for this is sort of evals. So a lot of the people who are building these LLMs are finding loads of cases like this, where they can have a really good bunch of data and they can compare how much the LLM performs to that. And when they're improving it, they can just run all these tests and see how well it does against these evals. I think this is, if you're going to build anything in real life for a real, like a business process or enterprise stuff, this stuff will be really key. This stuff is like just right or wrong, but let's say you're getting it to write copy, we probably want to make it so that there's like a like button for the copy for all the members of staff, or there's a ranking system. Because what we're going to want to do is every time we improve our prompt, we're going to want to see how it impacts everyone. If it's a sales system, we'll want something which is like, this prompt, how well does it do? No, so this is a little work example. I had a problem recently where we had a bunch of information about a business, and we needed to categorize this business according to a government classification of businesses. And it needs to be in a single sentence. So the first thing we tried, we did a 0-shot, no rag, classify this business for us. And it gave us mostly gibberish. It gave us loads of interesting ideas about how to classify it. It wasn't in any way linked to what the government wanted. and it would give whole paragraphs of text explaining things. So the next thing we could do is add in a little bit of Retrieval Augmented stuff and bring in, well actually we didn't really do RAG in the end, it was more just we bring in context. So we brought in that list in a JSON format of how to categorize things. And we said use exactly this list. And then we started doing few-shot experiments. Here is an example of a business, and here is the response you want to do. Here's the style that the answer is going to go in. We did delimiters and formatting so that we could easily show what is the question, what is the context, what is the data about the company. But there's other things that we could have done. We could have done chain of thought, so we could have got it to go through and give you like an explanation of each of the different classifications and rank from a scale of 0 to 1 how likely this company is to fit into them. So rather than just having an answer, it would go through and look at all the different options it could pick and look at each one and go, is it that one, is it that one, and then rank it. And then it will give you an answer based around what it's just provided. We could do tree of thought. Tree of thought is a little bit, it's a simplistic way, it's a little bit like chain of thought, but instead of chain of thought, you get a whole, you give a different persona to all of the different answers. So you say, imagine you are an expert in this way, imagine you're a different expert, imagine you're a different expert. What do you think now, and what's the next best course of action? So like you imagine you've got like a council looking at it. So you could easily imagine a tree of thought thing where what does a normal person think? What would an academic think? What would a government official think? To go through that. We could have tried consistency, where we got it to ask the same question 3 times or 5 times, and until it repeated the same answer a bunch of times, we wouldn't go for it. And then we could have done evals and validation. We could have easily looked at previous historical data about how these things are classified and write prompts that classify things better and better and better. That's the end of that talk.
Wow, Lee.
Wow.